When we think of space, we naturally think of the stars, solar systems, galaxy, the distant reaches of the universe.
But space has another dimension to explore, not outward, but inward, into all the basic elements of everything there is on our planet.
Here, a miniature world of space exists, a world filled with constant motion, one that went undetected for centuries. It is the world of the atom.
Free Radical Media Podcast. We're going to talk about something pretty interesting tonight. We're going to talk about technology, specifically 3D printing. So our guest tonight is Adam Jaay. He's a maker, 3D printer, early adopter of the technology. He's coming to us from north of Boston. And we're going to talk about 3D printing, specifically what is it? And secondly, the ramifications of the technology. So, Adam, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on. Great opportunity to talk about 3D printing with a different angle.
Absolutely.
Yep. Sure.
So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about how you got into 3D printing in general, how you became interested in it, how you became involved.
All right, we're going to jump right into the woo. Right off the bat, I like it. This story is kind of in depth. From a very roundabout way, I came to personal 3D printing via Terrence McKenna. Huh. And I know you guys reference him on your show, and you're familiar with all his work, and I'm sure that your listeners are as well. Yeah. So there was a time where I was listening to Terrence lectures all the time. I'd have a earbud in my ear constantly, just plumbing it in. And one thing that he said that always kind of rang around in my head was that if you wanted to evolve spiritually, learn 3D modeling and design. And the point he was coming from there was a aspect of communication, where if you wanted to convey, for conversation's sake, a dream, something that happened that had interesting visual consequences, made you think of something, and you wanted to represent that to somebody, sometimes it's un-Englishable, as he would say, and language, kind of fails. Seeing is believing. So if you were to have mass adoption of 3D modeling throughout the public, you'd have interesting addition to communication, language in some way, but communication as far as introducing a visual aspect. So I took that to, whether I took it to heart or just couldn't get it out of my head, I was in a point where I was looking for somewhere to go as far as career or moving forward in life, and I was looking for a way to apply that part of the McKennaism to what I had in front of me, and I started looking into character animation, like Pixar type stuff, and there's an online course that specializes in character animation. And I found out that it used to be jack of all trades. There's a couple parts to animating something like Pixar. You have a sculptor, a skinner, a rigger, which makes the 3D model like a puppet, and then a character animator. And now it's all specialized. Everybody does one thing. So I was really leaning towards doing that online course, investing a bunch of time and money, and thinking, oh, that would be interesting. I might get an interesting, good paying job and have a tool to apply to this whole neo-shamanism kind of kick that I was exploring. And I thought storytelling, well, that's an interesting, aspect, visual storytelling. So kind of fit into my groove, and I moved forward with that. And I started looking at all the different things that if you were just a character animator, you'd have to go and find puppets and props and things to gather, and you'd have to buy these virtual items that somebody, well, actually thousands of artists who have gone to school for the virtual sculpting of a virtual object, they've plumbed the imagination and dragged all these really interesting things out, and you had a whole library to choose from. And I was almost there, and then I came across, of all odd places, a voice chat and a conspiracy theory chat room kind of thing. And I was kind of vocal about what I was into and whatnot, and somebody that frequented the place as well and knew me pointed me towards a libertarian documentary on YouTube called Democratizing Manufacturing, and it featured a MakerBot cupcake 3D printer. And that just blew my mind. I don't know, all the potentials and stuff just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was instantly in. And it's just been a total downhill or uphill, I don't know, kind of both at the same time, ride from there. That was probably 2 or 3 years ago. And I immediately, I need one of these. Went to my wife, I was like, no more Christmases, no more birthdays. I want one of these things. And she said, well, instead of all that time saving and whatnot, take that time, apply it to, figure out maybe a business plan around it or whatnot. And that didn't realize what Pandora's box she opened there, because chasing that dream of monetizing, somehow getting in on the ground floor of personal 3D printing has been a very slippery thing, because it changes so rapidly. Exponential technological leaps and innovations, and because of the open source nature, it's all just bubbling like a cauldron and bubbles bursting and new things popping up. It's very hard to nail down with a business model, let alone something you can go to a bank with and say, this is what the first year is going to be like, because you have no idea. So that's kind of brings us up to the current point of having a 3D printer, printing pieces for other people to have 3D printers and get them into it, forming a club, forming local services, and again, just being a self-appointed evangelist about I kind of call it the printed promise, and that's just all-encompassing of what my pie in the sky vision of what it could turn into.
Right. I want to go back to, I love that term, democratizing manufacturing, and that's kind of what I see as being the promise of this technology. But I suppose first we should talk about the technology itself. I mean, basically, the 3D printer itself is a machine that can take a raw material and then produce what seems like an endless variety of things from it, right? And in your home without any kind of specialized without like the manufacturing industry behind it, let's say. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's almost to the point of an appliance, and you can either browse the internet for objects to print these virtual object files. .stl is the most common solid object file, or you can take on the challenge of downloading some free software and designing something yourself. And if it's a simple object, like a replacement part for some other appliance, it's actually pretty easy. The free software that's out there is comparable to the MS Paint of 3D design. It's called SketchUp, and they've kept up with the needs of the maker movement pretty well, and they keep updating it.
Interesting.
So what type of software is it comparable to? Is it like a SolidWorks or an AutoCAD, or is it what's the stereotypical programming that you're using to actually design the products with it?
Well, I use SketchUp primarily because it's free.
Mhm.
Blender is also free and very powerful, but there's a learning curve. The Blenders for Dummies book is rather thick, and I never got too deep into it. SketchUp is kind of forgiving. The controls are intuitive if you're coming from a photo editing or just general image editing background, like MS Paint. Really, it's very rough geometry, making smoother things, or organic objects is a little bit more advanced. But hey, it's free.
This is true.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Open source. Sure.
So, like with the 3D printer, with the things that you're able to make, what are the typical things that are being made right now with 3D printers? What's the most sought after things?
Well, for a while they were trying to make that object be the cell phone case. However, the rigid nature and slimline design of the modern cases and the rigid nature of the ABS plastic or the PLA plastic that goes into the personal printers, there were high failure rates, and some like tech bloggers that tried it out thinking that they were going to print their own cell phone cases. It just didn't work out the way they wanted, so it got a little bit bad press. But now we're on the cusp of, or past the cusp of new materials coming out for the same exact printers, a flexible material that should solve all the other problems of a rigid phone case. So you're going to see that come back. Phone cases will be really big, and plus it's because of attached to a consumer product that everybody has.
Mhm.
The other thing it's a bit of an argument. One of the criticisms is that the machines are the great American tchotchke maker, and then the other side of it is it's the the philosopher's stone of home do-it-yourselfness or permaculture or sustainability or what have you. So in that, you've got people making little pleasing aesthetic things, and then you've got people putting the bots to work. So there's a kind of slice down the middle there.
That's one of the interesting things to me is that it, from what I've read and seen on some ideas that people have about the future of this, is that you could literally just have a 3D printer in your home and you could make your furniture, you can make other appliances that you may need, you can make all these, you can even make other 3D printers. Is that a logical future for this?
Well, it'll be a matter of scale, most likely. Furniture, there would be really at some point there would be no need for that large a printer to be in the home. So you'd most likely, we're gonna see a local hub kind of model pop up where you can go to a place that's as drivable as a mall would be, and there would be a facility that could it would be 3D printing, it would be local manufacturing, but it'll be a couple steps away from consumer hands-on. The smaller units will be more situated for everyday items, useful things that have one use. But then we go into the another pie in the sky ideal of the RecycleBot, a closed loop system, which actually honestly needs a little bit of virgin material to work properly. Maybe a 60-40 split, but the scrap materials that are produced, which are less than a CNC, machine that takes away material, but there's still some inherent waste. And then you'll have the off chance of a fail, or perhaps you need an item just once. The idea that you could grind up these waste materials and also explore your local environment for abandoned ABS, refrigerator door liners, and some other things is a possibility in the near future. And grind them up, put them into a machine with virgin material and maybe some colorant, and extrude it into stock material once again. That's happening. You don't see a lot of incentive from the larger companies in the industry, but there's a lot of grassroots and Kickstarter projects that are focused on doing just that. There's a Philibot extruder. These are units that you could purchase. There's a open source project called the Lyman extruder that has a great 40 plus page documentation on what you need, where to get it, how to put it together, and you can print a lot of those pieces for these mechanisms as well.
That was actually another thing that I was interested in finding out, is the whole, you obviously we have such a massive amount of litter with plastic bottles and people buying plastic bottles of teas and waters and what have you, and there's a massive amount of waste. So I feel that with these printers, could we use that plastic and find a way to recycle it in that way to give people some incentive for more recycling, more helping the environment to instead of throwing them away, they could, if they have their own 3D printer, use that amongst the other recycled material that they're using to build stuff with it?
Well, yeah, that's one of the idealistic parts of this. If it doesn't get screwed up, it could very easily happen, where you have a material that's compatible with the plastic that our water bottles are made out of. We're moving forward in material sciences constantly to get to a point where these machines are more versatile in what types of thermoplastics they can use, and even quality, so you don't have to worry as much about introducing foreign waste plastic and mucking up the whole process. But imagine Sunday is recycling day in your local community, and instead of bringing out your plastic to the curb and a truck comes and it disappears and you're not really sure what happens to it, that's debatable from community to community. That's all subbed out and it's part of business, but what if you had a bin of washed clean plastic and you brought it down to your local 3D hub, it was weighed, and you had credits earned against finished objects later on. You're going to see hands-on and you're going to see hands-off interaction in the future.
I mean, that just sounds fantastic.
It does. I mean, like, we have such a huge issue with waste. I mean, that would have a definitely a profound effect on all kinds of things. I mean, just imagine, you go to the store, you purchase something, and instead of throwing it away, you throw it in the you throw it in your home unit and reuse it. I mean, that would cut down drastically on environmental impact, certainly.
Well, right now NASA they're working on a more advanced version to have a truly closed loop system on a long space voyage. If you need a wrench, print it, use it, put it back into the hopper, and it gets recycled.
Wow.
I know this comparison has been made before, but I mean, that's Star Trek,
Right. It's a low resolution kind of thing. And that actually brings us to where the future could be, long-term future. But I linked a bit of McKenna audio talking about, it was using nature as a model for futurism as for science. And he was talking about how nature works in low energies. And in a cell, the proteins are stamped out, a certain way, and that's the programming. And then they end up folding into whatever they need to, and each one is different and knows what to do. What we're seeing when a strand of thermoplastic extrudes from a nozzle, and the nozzle is moving in order to fold that thermoplastic into an object made of many layers, we're seeing the very early stages of the whole concept of how we will program future materials. Someday that thermoplastic will be, made of nano something or other, and have little receivers where if a pulse of some kind, microwave or electromagnetic or something, at a certain point when it passes out the nozzle, gives it a program, and then you have a big spool of spaghetti sitting on a pallet, and it gets zapped with another signal, and all of a sudden from one side it starts folding and folding and folding, and then you have an object after 5 minutes of this folding itself in. People have called that 4D printing. 4D, fourth dimension is really time, but it is the next dimension of 3D printing, where it'll be programmable matter, and you'll just have a spool of something, and then electronic files, much like we have now. But we've got a much, we have a rough version of what it could be. But that's decades, into material sciences.
Wow, that is some wild idea.
It's like it's getting the G code. What goes into the printer's machine code, G code, the X, Y, Z, and all the heating parameters, and we're externally applying that G code to the material. Soon we'll be able to get the G code into the material.
Are these the material that's being used? Is it solely a plastic composite, or is there a harder element to it? What I'm curious about is, can all of the components of the 3D printer be printed on a 3D printer?
No, we're probably up to some percentage over, depending on how you measure complexity, but we're almost maybe to half. There are ways to get kind of fudge it. You could cast the metal parts that you need for a printer out of the plastic printed parts that you designed. Soon, when we have conductive material and insulator material and a very, very fine extruder head and a dual extrusion system, you'll have the ability to print rough circuits. That brings us closer. But, a lot of these electronic components, stepper motors, circuit boards, microcontrollers, they come from China.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, are they? Do you see in the future that the technology with the 3D printers, that they will be able to create circuitry boards, smaller scale metal products of that sense? I mean, there's obviously metal components inside of circuit boards, but they're not to the degree of anything like a steel or something like that.
Yeah, we're really far off from an all-in-one printer that could do all those things in order to replicate itself. There's a lot of stuff that, but again, new projects every day. The people change the head on their printer from a extruder nozzle to a laser cutter to a milling head with a Dremel, and they're etching their own circuit boards. So I mean, you're getting there. Who knows what next month? Somebody will come up with something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, what's interesting is that it seems like, from what you're saying, just people like yourself or people who have a 3D printer just in their living room are working on these projects, kind of without like a corporate influence, R&D. I mean, these are just people working on these projects, right? I mean, it's essentially like an open source type of movement.
Yeah, that's how everything kind of came to be. A lot of open source projects. The RepRap project came from early work. 3D printing has been around for 25 years industrially here in Massachusetts. There's a couple heavy hitters, 3D Systems and Stratasys, that acquired MakerBot. But the initial bringing it to a personal desktop level was hobbyists and independent people who had access to maker tools like Arduino microcontrollers. That's a $25 microcontroller that runs on a little kind of generic chip, and it is the brains of the early 3D printers and some of the current ones.
Okay. So who what are some of the companies that are making 3D printers? I mean, what does that field look like? I mean, are these big corporations? Are they small, like privately run organizations?
You've got both, but it's the field is shrinking. The big boys are absorbing the smaller guys.
Of course.
You've got one holdout of note, Lulzbot. They have an excellent printer that boasts use of many different filaments. It's truly open source. They won an award for the free Free Software Foundation, FSF or something like that. Basically the first bit of hardware to ever get that open source accreditation from that foundation, which was a pretty big step, and they've been resisting big buyouts. And they seem to have the hearts of the maker community, but there's a big market opening with people who want to jump in it in a kind of hands-off manner. So you're getting the more heavily controlled units, designs that they didn't learn their lesson from Xbox and PlayStation, getting a beating about control over, communication information and a product that you own. So they have a very tight lock on what type of materials you can put in. You have to buy the materials from them. They really want you to buy your files from them, and it's a very tightly controlled user environment.
That to me is the key issue here. When I read stuff and I hear some of these awesome potentials of the 3D printers, my main question to everyone always is, well, who's controlling the product that you're using to make the various things with the 3D printer? Because if you don't have the material to make it, then you can't make anything. So, are these companies that are starting to buy up some of the smaller companies, are they the ones who are primarily, selling these materials, or is there a way in which that you can make your own materials? How's that working?
Well, even if you're going to try to make your own stock material, let's say with ABS exclusively, which is a petroleum-based thermoplastic, and it's similar to what ABS 5 is similar to what the Legos uses for their bricks.
Okay.
Hold on a second, I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, you're right, Jay. I mean, in order for this to be truly transformational, I think it needs to remain in the hands of the private user. I mean, this is why we talk so much about net neutrality, keeping control of the internet in the hands of the user rather than state and corporate interests. I think it's the same in this context.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, sorry about that.
No problem.
You're good.
So if we were going to just focus on ABS exclusively, and you were to go out and try to scavenge as much as you could from your local environment, you'd still have to add some virgin pellet material, and that would be where the bottleneck is if somebody wanted to buy up all the sources for that. However, all over the country, places that had thriving injection molding industry, they're hurting. A lot of that work has gone overseas, so they're actually moving into retooling to extrude their stock materials into this suitable filament for the 3D printing environment. So you're having a bit of a gold rush in the plastics area. As far as the big guys, they're kind of moving over from stamping out widgets to extruding stock material for this kind of revolution that's going on.
Do you see in any way what is the amount of this material that's out there? I mean, there's so much recycled plastic. There's so much just trash plastic that is polluting the environment. Is there any scenario where you could see supply and demand being limiting in the amount of stuff that can be made in individual printers?
Not really, because I'm sure that if some really smart people put their mind to it, as far as material scientists, they could figure out a way to take that garbage patch that's in the Pacific and now a similar problem growing in the Great Lakes, figure out a way to dredge out those little micro bits of plastic and bale them up, render them into some usable thermoplastic in a rough fused deposition modeling personal 3D printer. There's really no reason besides just throwing money at it why it couldn't be done. And that's not an expert opinion, but it just seems like it's there. And with a little TLC as far as adding virgin material and treating bales of this Pacific plastic, it could be, it could be done. But I'm sure nobody could come up with a cost-effective model that would convince anybody that, it should be done.
Isn't that always the problem right there?
Exactly.
Is, within the rubric of capitalism, if it's not cost-effective, it doesn't happen.
Right.
Even though, that seems like such a logical thing. Let's take our garbage and make it serve a useful purpose. That seems reasonable and rational to me.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's another pie in the sky, very idealistic idea as far as drudging that out. The original idea involved giant 3D printed solar whales that would just drink the water and baleen out all the plastic, poop out bales. It was a beautiful, beautiful idea.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. Yeah.
As far as the state of the technology right now, like what sort of things are people making that are, directly of practical use? You mentioned, cell phone cases, but, is there anything more, innovative that people are 3D printing?
Well, in the transhumanism episode that you guys did, you brought up robotic arms, and again the question came up, like, who controls it, who gets the robotic arm? We're getting to a point, and you see it every day popping up, as far as prosthetics 3D printed for fractions of the cost of what an actual prosthetic for a young child would be. There's somebody in our local area that did the same thing for $40, replaced or substituted for a $5,000 prosthetic. And with these makerspaces popping up, a person, I think it was your example was a guy at the mill who gets his his arm mangled, and does he get a robotic arm? A working class guy. Well, if the system is such that he can't get a good $40,000 robotic prosthetic, he can always go down to the local makerspace and say, hey, I'm a human being and I got this issue and I was wondering if you could help me out. And I'm sure they'd be happy to help him out for the cost of the materials, a little microcontroller, a little bit of hobbyist this, and a little bit of laser cutting that, 3D printing over here. And he's got, a good, an equivalent. And he also, bolstered the local community, made some friends. And, I think that's kind of where we're going. Focusing locally is going to be, a big thing. The permaculture people really push for it, and we see it in other subcultures and movements.
Yeah, we're seeing it all over the place. Everyone we talk to really has this local focus, and I really like it. And I like this idea of these maker spaces being like a community resource center. That's really fascinating to me. I feel like that's a real positive thing for communities. I think that's a positive use of the technology.
That goes hand in hand with the citizen scientist movement as well. A lot of open source hardware specifically made for people to do projects and create sensor packages in interesting and useful places. And the Department of Agriculture spends millions a year just trying to focus on where they want to, put their efforts as far as invasive species and whatnot. And a lot of that data is starting to come from these citizen scientist projects that utilize these little open source hardware boards, and they put a sensor package together that, not only suits their local area, but is also, maybe 3D printed to kind of look like it's supposed to go with this tree, and all these little nuanced ways that it's affecting reality and how we interact with it.
Definitely. Yeah. Is there? I guess. When you look at the current paradigm that we're living in of the capitalist system, a lot of these corporations are probably looking at how can we maximize profit. So is there really one thing that is being noticed inside of the community of 3D printing that 3D printers seem to be really efficient at replacing or doing better than something currently that we're using other means to create?
Yes, but the benefit is a bit abstract. If you need like a bottle opener or let's say I guess a decent example is I broke my smartphone and had to put the micro SD card into my older smartphone, which actually took a mini SD card or a SIM card. I'm sorry, and instead of having to go down to the store, possibly start up the car or whatever, and buy a mass-produced item from the other side of the world, a plane, train, automobile, to get to me, made by the thousands, and hope that somebody like me would need it someday, plus the packaging that it came in is usually more mass than the item itself. It was in this particular instance. So instead, I looked up on the free sites that host the shareable object files. Somebody had this problem before me and made a micro SIM to mini or regular SIM adapter. And I was back in business with my old phone in a matter of 45 minutes or so.
Wow.
And that short circuits the normal course of, doing things, needing a part and going out and acquiring it, and for good or for ill, it's happening.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. That kind of brings me something I definitely wanted to talk about here is the effect on economics, right? So making things like that instead of going to Walmart and purchasing them, I mean, certainly if this becomes widespread, that has an effect on the big box store business model, right? Mm. It has an effect on imports and exports and manufacturing. So where do you see this going in terms of economics, right? I mean, what do you see the net effect being in 10 years, 20 years?
Well, I haven't been able to get a meeting at Walmart yet, but when they call me back, I'll let them know that, don't fight it. Go with the flow. It's not quite ready yet. There are ways to adopt it now to bolster corporate culture and in-house costs, but soon it's going to be ready when industrial meets personal, and the difference between the two is price. Personal 3D printing technology, $5,000 or less. Industrial, 5 to the moon. When that comes together, you'll see local manufacturing hubs, anything that can be 3D printed with the vast array of materials that will be. It'll preferably be printed close to you to minimize shipping. And the first couple of titans that really adopt this will probably be the ones standing. There's going to be companies that resist it, and they're going to get mowed over. They're not going to see what, coming. They won't know what hit them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's certainly a radical change, though. Certainly a radical change in the way we do things. I mean, it's almost it's almost something you can't imagine. It's fascinating to me. What do you have in terms of your local area? Like, what is your 3D printing community doing where you are?
Right now, we're still basically searching out the community. Boston itself has a thriving 3D printing community. They've got a lot of different maker spaces, and of course, you got MIT down there, so it's an epicenter for what's going on. Boston itself has one of the first MakerBot retail stores on Newbury Street. But for us, we're basically trying to come up with creative and, if possible, monetizable ways to bring 3D printing to Main Street, to people's lives in an effective and meaningful way. And right now we're still trying to figure out what the best way to do that is.
That seems to be one of the key things. I mean, if we're still going to move forward in the monetarized paradigm, it seems as though we're going to have to figure out a way to make this type of technology profitable in some manner.
Yeah. Well, beneficial and profitable, unfortunately, are two different things. Beneficially, the dividends will be the next couple of generations. When you have kids exposed to this, like the current generation going through school right now has, been exposed to the internet from birth.
Mm-hmm.
When you have these creative tools making objects more plentiful and cheaper, removing this object fetishism kind of, culture that we got going on simply by not putting as much value on something that you could easily just, make yourself and quite frankly make better and custom to you in an afternoon. But all that and this rapid prototyping being part of your daily life, solving problems with the knowledge that you have the permission to fail. And this is basically a price point issue. The filament, stock material, and the machine itself are cheap enough that you can really flesh out an idea and go through 6 versions and not be, too upset that, you wasted all that time you got there. And when you fail, you learn from your mistakes. So if you're failing a lot, you're learning a lot. And you're going to get this exponential spike in innovation amongst young people. Right now, people, the trend is Minecraft when they don't know it, but they're learning virtual object design on a very low res, pixelated version of it.
Sure.
But they can already print their Minecraft creations, and maybe the next version of Minecraft will be designed with a mind towards possible physical manifestations of the creations at some point. But you're going to see this very, very odd influx of design engineers. every kid will be a design engineer.
And I think that's a huge positive for people to be able to fully utilize their creative functions and to make something, like you were saying, a specific product that they can specify just for their needs of what that product is. A lot of this stuff is just mass produced and it's supposed to be for everyone, but sometimes you need something specific.
Well, it has cultural ramifications as well. I assume you guys know about the Oculus Rift.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
VR device. Facebook buying it aside.
Yeah.
I saw one article about a project where they were utilizing the Oculus to view an STL file of a to-be printed 3D object. And they could, I guess, spin it and maybe zoom and whatnot and really take a look at this in a virtual space. What I haven't seen yet is a editing, 3D sculpting project for the Oculus. But when that happens, and it will, and that meets the Minecraft generation, and you get this, again, a spike in visual communication, because if it's super easy to whip up something, your hands and fingers are a million different tools in a limitless virtual space, and get really adept at making creations really fast, and everyone you make creates a library you can pull from and make things even faster. You couple that with what we're seeing in the animated GIF revolution. Animated GIFs themselves are becoming art and language, or a form of communication on their own. What Tesla did with replacing a press conference with 3 animated GIFs. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then an animated GIF is worth 1,000 press conferences, because seeing is believing. So you get this streamlining of all these communication technologies that we've never really encountered before, and you get back to this McKenna idealistic turning language into a visual form, and seeing is believing. It just gets further and further, and it's this 3D printing is just kind of the catalyst that will put that into that launch that meme into the pop culture, and give a reason to make the tools that will enable the next generations to communicate visually, faster than we could probably even imagine right now.
Right. It's almost as if the 3D printer is the bridge from the digital to the physical.
Well, yeah, that's exactly my thought. When McKenna's talks on virtual reality, I guess back in the 90s, they were, really this VR, this is the savior, this is the place we can go in, express ourselves, explore, and, all these high-minded ideas about VR and virtual reality. Then, we've been in there for the last couple of decades, and some people choose to live in there, and now it's kind of passé. But now we have the tools to start dragging things out of that virtual reality and into the 3D,
right,
and kind of holding it up to the light and showing everybody. And that in itself has cultural ramifications that I'm very much enjoying, kind of play out.
Yeah, sure. It reminds me, we're talking about occultism sometimes here. It reminds me of visualizing something in the astral or virtual plane, and then it manifesting in consensus reality. It seems like the lines, we've created this virtual realm, and now the lines are blurring, right, between what consensus reality as we know it now is, and this virtual world that is supposedly separate from us, but increasingly we're becoming a part of it.
Which is a very psychedelic concept if you use the definition of boundary dissolving and consciousness expanding.
Yep. We're literally streamlining what's in our imagination to the physical universe.
Yeah, powerful tool of creation or manifestation, however you want to look at it. You mentioned occult, and it allows me to segue into something I was thinking of earlier today. Was it Clarke's third law of prediction? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. There's interesting parallels between this black magic that is 3D printing and just general occultism. We basically the G code, the machine language, is a incantation, and we secretly utter it from machine to, we take it from one machine and we secretly utter it to another machine, and all of a sudden a physical object is manifested in the reality. It's, we're getting to that point where technology is catching up with the alchemical dreams, as far as our smartphone possibly being the philosopher's stone, and, when we get the 3D printer into the smartphone, then we, get even closer.
Yeah, and when you say that, it reminds me of Crowley's quote, magic is the art and science of causing reality to conform with will. And under that definition, certainly this is a form of magic, absolutely, because you are creating something that you willed into an existence in a program,
Right. I projected what was in my mind onto a illuminated manuscript of a computer screen, and through black art, it pops out on the other end of the flow chain.
It is fascinating. One of the other things you were talking about earlier, when you had first said about trial and error, and then you mentioned the Oculus Rift of being in this virtual world, I started thinking, well, what if we were able, you had this object created in the virtual reality, and then you're inside of virtual reality and you're using it in a virtual world to see what its efficiency would be in the physical world. It seems as though you may be able to bypass certain trial and error steps of making the physical product whereas you would be in the virtual world using it virtually and seeing how it worked in the virtual world, and then hopefully that translating into the physical world.
Well, I have some of that ability as far as the slicing program. The way this works is I decide that I want to print something. I either select it from an existing catalog of free shareable things or design it myself. So then you have this watertight, solid virtual object. The slicing software, the software that preps a solid virtual object for the printing process, you can scale it and put in a bunch of other parameters, and basically it will slice from bottom to top an object into very, very like 0.2 millimeter slices, and then plot its head, the extruder head path along those slices to get your layers.
Okay. Yeah.
So it is sort of running a trial and error for itself in some degree.
Well, that particular software will, because it's running all of this, you can surmise how long it's gonna take, give you a simulation of what it's gonna look like, the layers, if it sliced properly, if it's too big for your plate, what the support material is going to look like. So it is a little bit of a look into the possible future without having to, be in the virtual environment yourself.
Mm. I was thinking more along the lines of, say you made a wrench and you needed a wrench for a specific, you're working on your car and you're not able to reach into an area where you have to get a bolt or something, and you could create a virtual 3D image of your engine, and then you could create this virtual wrench that you design that you feel would be able to allow you to get in there properly. And that sort of a situation where you could virtually see how this tool would be working in the environment that you would be using it in. Do you see that as being a possibility?
Yeah, that's possible. Right now, there's a lot of different 3D scanning bits of hardware and software that you could use in the shop environment, do a 3D scan of the area, even if you couldn't get in there. If light can get in there, you can get a scan of that particular nut and create a tool for that. If you had a metal 3D printer, laser sintering machine, then you'd be better off. But design-wise, possible with the tools we have.
It's a pretty awesome potential future, really.
Yeah. I want one.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I always suggest that people search your local environment. There's probably an enthusiast near you that not only will, print you out something so you could, see an example of it, but, walk you through or point you in the right direction of, acquiring one, building one yourself. It's, it's a weekend project, and it brings the cost down considerably, and you get more involved. Knowing your machine is really key, but essentially having a couple workshops or having some hands-on experience is a good way to avoid buyer remorse, because again, people kind of get into things not being a tinkerer when you really kind of, at this point in the technology, you have to be willing to tinker and have some patience.
Definitely. Is there a large variety right now as far as the 3D printing options go, as far as being able to buy your own, create your own?
Yeah, it's growing every day. Kickstarter's been an incubator for a lot of different printers. Really cheap ones, novel approach in different technology. You've got FDM machines, fused deposition modeling. Those are like the MakerBots or the Prusas based on the RepRap open source project. Lulzbot, the Solid Doodle, the one you can buy, or the Cube, one of the ones you could buy at like Staples or Office Max or someplace like that. Then you have a stereolithography machine, uses a photoreactive resin. suitable for really high detail aesthetic things, architects and model makers and whatnot. And then you've got a powder bath that's really still in the industrial realm as far as price, but they boast a lot of different colors. And one person out in California that I know uses one of those and a really high-end 3D scanner, and scan a whole person and print them out color matched, their shirt color tone and or skin tone and all of that. There's really an array of things, and patents just recently expired, which means we're going to see some attempts at possibly metal laser sintering with a powder bath, some kind of metal powder bath. You're going to see that in the consumer realm at some point, but yet to see if that takes off or if people will be content with thermoplastics. There's going to be a range of different materials as far as thermoplastics. Carbon nanotubing has been just released, but not. It's a doped polymer with carbon nanotubes. The strength you would relate to carbon nanotubes doesn't really translate there, but the conductivity of it does translate. You got flexible, you've got a wood filament, which I really didn't quite understand the applications until I saw somebody print a speaker out of this wood filament that was shaped like a nautilus shell, and then I remembered, oh yeah, that's right. Things look really nice when they're made out of wood.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Sure. Yeah, it's,
you made me when you were talking about conductivity, you made me think of wiring, and with copper wiring and various types of materials like that. Is there a way in which you could see in the future of making plastic wiring?
Yes, there's also a person who made a machine that embeds wire into the print as it goes for an inlay kind of circuit print.
Man.
But if you had the machines right now, they have dual extrusion capabilities, and that's getting better and better. So if you had one nozzle with insulated thermoplastic and another with conductive, and you 3D printed a core of conductive with an insulative outer, you would have a wire and depending on the flexible nature, it could have a rigid flavor and a flexible flavor. These are all very real possibilities in the near future.
That's pretty awesome, especially when you think of a lot of the mineral shortages that we're supposedly starting to face, and obviously with fossil fuels and things of that nature, to have something like this that is so renewable and recyclable. It's pretty amazing where this technology is promising to head.
Well, there's even more promise, and we haven't mentioned the possibility of a hemp polymer.
Oh man! Wow.
So the PLA material that right now a lot of 3D printers is their go-to material. It operates at a lower temperature. It's made out of a corn byproduct, but it can also be biodegrade, decompose, break down in a highly acidic environment. So for an object like my garbage disposal drain cover that I printed out of ABS, it wouldn't be really suitable for PLA. But that's one of the other plant-based thermoplastics. We don't see any hemp right now, most likely because of prohibition. There's no wide-scale cultivation and manufacture in polymer.
Yeah.
But the legends of the Henry Ford car that ran on hemp oil and was made of hemp polymer and the fenders and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
All we have to do is look back to him and see if we can't resurrect that formula.
Yes, certainly. I mean, we've been singing the praises of industrial hemp for years. Industrial hemp, even without a 3D printing context, is just a good idea. It's such a useful substance, right?
And magic to magic. You get uber magic.
Right, yeah, exactly. But I hadn't even considered that, and that's truly amazing, because then you have a resource. Hemp grows It grows everywhere, and it grows quickly, and you get multiple harvests in a season. I mean, it's the ultimate renewable resource, right? I mean, that's fantastic.
Is that something that there's any that you know of anyone working towards that technology?
I do not. I don't think anybody sees, the money in it in the short term. So I don't know of any projects that's even small batch working on a hemp polymer for personal 3D printing.
Hopefully, Washington and Colorado people listening there get on that, because that would be that'd be pretty amazing. I mean, when you look at the plastic, I mean, obviously these things can be recycled and what have you, but there's still that still does create a lot of plastic devices of what have you. And if you can make something out of a natural substance, why not? It creates less potential waste. Although it seems as if these printers are creating the ability where we would have no excuse to have any sort of waste, because they could just be recycled into other products.
Well, the e-waste itself, there was an article about a African gentleman that built a 3D printer from online instructions out of discarded computer parts and electronic waste and printer parts and whatnot. And then that person can go on to Thingiverse and print a bunch of useful things that can be used for, general quality of life, hygiene. There's triage type medical devices on there. Something called a Dremel Fuge, just a little bit of plastic designed to go onto a Dremel, hold the centrifuge vials of blood, and be a triage type centrifuge in third world or disaster situations. And that was just one example. I'm sure there's tons of other things that the applications, or you print the parts for other printers. There's all kinds of different things that are going to happen, are happening.
Every time you say something, you open up another door where I start thinking about things. You're talking about disaster situations, third world country areas and stuff like that, being able to print syringes and medical equipment and so many basic necessities for those people. I mean, it's really just incredible.
There's the potential to alleviate poverty. Yeah.
Well, in a disaster situation, it's possible you could be using storm debris as your stock material to go into the grinder, to feed into the extruder, to go into the printer.
It's just so amazing. This hopefully, this people start to recognize this technology, because this is just it's hard to fathom just what the possibilities are in 20, 30 years.
Every discipline, every industry, every interest that it touches, it augments, changes, affects in some way. They could list any discipline, and I could probably give you a couple of examples, either ongoing or hypothetical, that could change how that protocol or standard operating procedure for whatever industry or discipline would be.
Yeah,
challenge me. Go ahead.
Well, what do you guys think?
Education.
All right. As far as education, I'll give you an example of one of the things that I have not 20 feet from me. The Smithsonian released a bunch of 3D scans of some items that they had, one of which is a shipwreck. That was a Civil War gunboat, I believe the Philadelphia. And it's in the Smithsonian. They 3D scanned it. They put out the files for free, and now I have one, sitting on my mantle. In the, the perfect school of the future, when you're talking about ancient Greece or you're talking about, history of any kind, we can physically bring some of those artifacts, into the classroom, hand them around. Done with it? All right, throw it into the hopper. It's going to be a sarcophagus tomorrow. And then that's not even to mention the, innovation and the whole permission to fail and the hands-on learning and designing and all the different things that'll come from that. You know, a kid in his attic is going to crack perpetual motion. A team of science fair kids will, you know, get to cold fusion. You know, it'll be because they don't know, you know, design limits. They could just keep trying and failing, and there's no repercussions.
What about we were talking about this earlier, that they're talking about potentially being able to make food on a 3D printer?
It's a bit of a misnomer. They're using food as stock material and then sculpting stuff out of that stock material. So whether that's 3D printing food or not is debatable. The same thing with even the medical 3D printing. There's two types. You've got the 3D printing of like a biocompatible material into like a scaffolding of, let's say, the cartilage of an ear of a burn victim, and then they'll grow tissue on that scaffolding to attach it. Then there's an inkjet printer that'll actually, dab down proteins or, stem cells or what have you, but it's an ink type situation. HP is kind of going in that direction. Photo cured inks and that kind of, because it's versatile in the medical industry as well. And then there's also a guy that came up with a machine that's similar to how a regular personal 3D printer works, as far as adding reagents of different chemicals together to, create little mini pharmaceutical drugs. You print your aspirin or whatnot. But one of the interesting things that he found out is that the reaction vessels for each compound or each medicine that you're trying to make doesn't have to be identical. In fact, aspirin maybe reacts better when it has a conical ridged reaction vessel, and a different medicine, the reaction is more efficient on a spherical or dome-shaped valve. All these different things, and that's just a handful of examples.
That's
pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is. You trying to you hear this stuff, and it's just it's completely changing the entire paradigm, and it's amazing that this one little device is doing that.
Yeah, it's a successful meme. People like it. It's been reproduced and augmented and set forward even farther, and it's definitely not going away.
Hopefully, yeah.
Good, yeah. And also, I hope it stays in the hands of private users, because I think that's where the most interesting things are going to come from.
There is a bit of a fight, but hopefully cooler heads will prevail and nothing will be done to stifle, the innovation or the rapid growth, because we're seeing something like the internet happening, but it has the internet as a bedfellow, so it's just moving that much quicker as far as affecting us and changing things and moving even farther down the rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, anytime you introduce bureaucracy, you end up limiting your ability to create and
be
innovate.
Creative. Yeah. And you just said you just said rabbit hole, and I swear that phrase has been kicking through my head the last 20 minutes. This rabbit hole goes down further than I thought at the beginning of this conversation.
There's so many different facets. It's very difficult to just be on top of what's going on a daily basis in the world of personal 3D printing, let alone industrial 3D printing.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I saw a guy on Reddit not long ago doing an IAMA about it's one of those Earthship houses he made with tires, And I'm just thinking about, a permaculture property, with one of these energy efficient houses. You have a personal 3D printer, and you've got a good community around you with, the bigger 3D printers, the distribution sites. And what an incredible, sustainable model that is, It just, culturally, I think this has a lot of ramifications.
Yeah, the futurists really didn't see this one coming.
No.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I know we're coming to the end of our time here. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, let's keep this going for a little bit more. Let's talk about the houses for a second.
Sure.
Sure.
There's a bunch of companies that are making really large gantry, whether they're cement or some kind of polymer slurry. They're just a big old 3D printer, and they're 3D printing houses. But some of the things we've seen is that no longer do we need to obey the right angle rules of building houses. So you're going to see a lot of almost like, I guess, the Flintstones house or the house from Dinosaurs, that show, kind of moundish, which is efficient, wind resistant, storm resistant. One group has applied an algorithm that they derived from the way bone grows. Because if you did a vivisection of the bone, looked at it at a microscope, you'd see it's very porous. It only has material where material needs to be in order to sustain that outer structure and form. So these houses look like very bizarre alien dinosaur skulls, but they're the most efficient design that you could possibly get, which brings us to a point that I really wanted to make, is that using nature as a model.
Right.
Yeah.
If you look at high technology on any front, you're going to see that it's not being acknowledged as like a widely accepted, oh yeah, look at this, but it's happening. All of the high technology is using nature as its model in some way. If only we applied that to other, realms of our governance and, day-to-day lives, it would probably be better off. But it's clear that in, science and technology, and certainly, 3D printing, it seems as well, we're getting to a point where, nature is the model.
Definitely. No, I agree completely with that. Nature's been around a lot longer than we have, and it'll continue to be around. And we could learn a couple things from it if we would just sit back and pay attention to the way it works. And obviously, we have, with like you said, yes, a lot of our high technologies are emulating nature, and it's not too hard to see why, because it is obviously the most efficient way to go about doing things.
Well, yeah, it's been pointed out, like the internet mirrors like a mycelial network. We've talked about that a lot. I think that's a fascinating concept.
I was just going to ask if you guys had, heard of Paul Stamets, so thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Nipping that in the bud. I'm a big fan of mushrooms eat oil.
Yeah, the TED Talk that he did, that was a very interesting and mind-opening talk. Is there anything else that you can think of just crazy technology that these 3D printers are doing that the average person wouldn't know about?
The average person wouldn't know about. That is a good question. I see I've got myself in a bit of a bubble where I've informed, screaming from the rooftop, all the people in my community about it. So it's hard to judge what the best example of that would be. I guess the prosthetic thing has really gotten some press, not enough in my opinion compared to some of the negative stuff that's been going on. But there's been a lot of movement in the quality of life or wellness or medical hobbyist world. I guess that's a subculture now. Using these maker tools, these real inexpensive gadgets and gizmos and whatnot to produce things that normally wouldn't be attainable by the average person, and basically giving over their labor of love over to the world to make it a better place. That's impactful in a lot of different ways.
Oh, definitely. So I guess what are some of the websites, forums, companies that people should be aware of if they're looking to get into starting to use 3D printers, learn more about 3D printers? What are things you can suggest to them to start looking into?
I would suggest using sites like meetup.com to search out maker spaces or 3D printing clubs or artists and makers, the search terms to use. MakeXYZ.com is a 3D printer listing. You can put in your zip code and it'll pop up on a map all the different printers around you. And chances are you'll be able to connect with the local maker community or makerspace that way as well. Another website to use is 3dhubs.com, very similar to MakeXYZ. MakeXYZ is out of Texas. 3D Hubs, I believe, is out of the Netherlands or something like that. And those are just great places to start. And sometimes there's promotions just to get people into 3D printing. You get a free print, and the printer gets paid, and everybody's happy. You get to go to your local guy and kind of see the operation, get firsthand experience on seeing the thing work. Sometimes people just can't quite, even videos, then not quite understand what they're seeing. A live viewing is really, rams it home for people.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd like to see one of these things in action for sure.
Well,
and also I believe libraries are starting to really pick up on the idea of moving from a dying kind of place in the community to bringing in these creativity spaces and offering 3D printing and lessons on these microcontrollers and stuff. So check the local libraries and such.
That's an idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, a library is supposed to be a community center. I think that's a good use of that space.
A library of things is basically what they can be now. And you could have, if this recycling element were to really take off and really get perfected, you could have a lending library of objects. You have somebody coming over, you want to impress, put a nice bust of Beethoven and a nice vase over in the corner, and you borrowed it from the library, it was printed out for you yesterday, and when you're done, you bring it back, and they recycle it and print something else with it for somebody else.
Well, that's another idea that I just love.
Yeah.
Add that to the list of dozens of ideas that I just love from this conversation. Well, Adam, this was great. Are you open to people contacting you? Do you want to give out contact information, or?
Yeah, you can get at me through my email, AtomJay, AtomJaay @gmail. I'll be happy to answer any questions or, just get feedback from my spiel, because I've been practicing it, like I said, in my local reality for a couple of years now.
Yeah, well, I can tell. We'll link that in the description. Adam, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
No problem. Thanks for having me.